This is the most heart-wrenching case I have ever encountered in my career as a journalist. The victim was a 6-year-old girl. The one who hurt her was actually her father. The girl's name is Lily Evans. Her family was one of the poorest in the area. They lived on the mountainside of a remote village on the outskirts of Aspen Creek County in a crumbling adobe house. Her father, William, was in his 40s. 6 months ago, he had an accident at a construction site that resulted in the amputation of his left leg below the knee. After months of rehabilitation, he was able to walk with a prosthesis and even take regular walks on the hillside behind their house. Physically, he was fine, but there was a bigger problem. William was the sole breadwinner of the family. His accident pushed their already impoverished family to the brink of collapse. To make matters worse, the construction site manager ran away, and William not only did not receive adequate compensation, but was also in debt for medical expenses. To add insult to injury, a month ago, his wife Mary left home and has not been heard from since. The unfortunate family was left with only a disabled man and a girl who had not yet gone to school. It all started with a poverty alleviation project. We decided to do a feature story on their family, hoping to raise some funds for them. Our office sent me and my colleague, Anna Wilson, to liaise with the local government, and led by Director Johnson of the county governing office, the village head Evans of the village went to William's house. At the door of the mud house, a little girl was sitting alone on the threshold playing. Seeing us, she stood up like a startled bird, holding on to the doorframe, a fearful look on her face. Village head Evans told us that she was Lily. Oscar. Anna was about to go up and say hello, but Lily immediately turned and went into the house. Village head Evans motioned for us to go inside. The light inside the house wasn't very good, a bit dim. As we walked in the door, a man greeted us, leaning on crutches with both hands. This was William. He looked much older than his age, with an honest and simple appearance. Village head Evans introduced us to him, and we sat down in his humble hall and chatted. Lily came out of the side room again and stood at the door, peeking at us. Since the routine of the poverty alleviation program was similar, I asked the questions and recorded the content according to the established procedure. My colleague, Anna, took pictures of the harsh environment of his home. Just as the conversation was coming to an end, Hannah pulled Lily back into the living room and interjected abruptly. "Everyone just now, Lily said she wanted to go to the county town to play, and I thought since Director Liu and I are going to stay for a few days, why don't we let Lily go to the county town with me? I can take her to play and send her back when we leave." To be honest, her tone was stiff. Both Director Johnson and village head Evans were stunned. William also said a child, "It may not be very good." I immediately realized something was wrong. Such an outrageous and untimely request. How could she say it unless she had to? I quickly calmed down and explained. "Actually, Anna didn't make it clear. This is also part of the poverty alleviation feature. We have also discussed it before, hoping to apply for a special child care fund by filming an episode of the children's daily life. That way, we can basically cover all of Lily's tuition and living expenses until she is 18 years old." Upon hearing this, William readily agreed with a smile, although we were still doubtful. But seeing Lily obediently following Anna out, we could only quickly end the conversation and follow them out. We said goodbye to village head Evans and returned to the car. Director Johnson was in the passenger seat, and Anna and Lily were in the back. It was obvious that Director Johnson still had some minor questions, but we managed to evade them all. After returning to the county town, we politely declined Director Johnson's invitation to have dinner together and went straight back to the hotel. Anna took Lily back to her room and let her rest for a while. Lily was also very well behaved and completely obeyed the arrangements. Then she came to my room and told me what she had encountered in the morning. While she was taking pictures everywhere she came across Lily, who was idle. She happened to have candy with her, so she took it out to coax Lily and chat with her. Because Lily's mother had run away from home and her whereabouts were unknown, Anna subconsciously paid more attention to the relationship between the father and daughter. Lily said, "Dad is very good to me. He often plays with me." "Really? What does Dad usually play with you?" "Dad has a very cute toy, a little elephant. He often lets the elephant play with me." "Where is your toy elephant? Can you let my sister play with it too?" No, I can only play with it at night. The elephant is on Dad. He is busy now." It was this sentence that made Anna realize something was wrong. She didn't know if her guess was right, but the phrase "the elephant is on Dad" was very deliberate and hard not to overthink. So she pretended to be calm and asked with a smile, "Lily, tell my sister, how does Dad let you play with the elephant?" She said, "Dad gave me the elephant and let me tease it, and it would grow bigger. Sometimes he let me put it in my mouth, and it would move around. It was fun." Shock was an understatement to describe Anna's state at that time. She had only one thought in mind: get her away from her father right now. So that's why the above hasty and incongruous thing happened. Damn it, that's disgusting. I was not feeling well at all after listening to the whole thing, and even blurted out a curse word. Fortunately, Anna had calmed down and was thinking about how to solve the problem. Listen to me, the most important thing now is how to confirm this matter. After all, with Lily's age and personality, she is unlikely to face her father's crime directly. I also tried to calm myself down and thought for a moment before saying, "You go and coax Lily, let her say it again, and record it. I'll go talk to Director Johnson and see when it's appropriate to call the police. Also, don't think about making this into news. For now, I'll explain the situation to the leader." She nodded and immediately went to do it. Lily was too well behaved, and the video was recorded quickly. Then I let Anna take her to play to eat. I went to find Director Johnson, thinking about how to deal with this in the best way possible. For example, what about Lily's life? Does she have any other place to stay? But the problem was far more than I could have imagined. There were even more terrible things that I could not have imagined. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. Director Johnson exclaimed after hearing this. I took out my phone and showed him the video. He was dumbfounded, and his tone changed instantly. Misunderstanding, there must be a misunderstanding. Even I felt puzzled. Director Johnson, why would you find it so hard to believe? His daughter has already said so. Director Johnson frowned and clucked his tongue. Because I know this man too well. He is the best man in the village. Mary is mentally ill. He never disliked her, treated her very well, and never disliked her for not being able to have children. So that's it. So Mary, who ran away from home, was mentally ill and unable to have children. Wait, then, where did Lily come from? Director Johnson frowned again, seemingly not intending to say, but at this time had to say. Well, this must have been picked up. Adopted. I was even more furious. This bastard doing this to someone who's not his own daughter. Director Johnson's brow furrowed even more. At first he didn't believe it at all, but after saying that Lily was adopted, he began to waver. I stressed to him again. Director Johnson, Lily is only 6 years old. 6 years old. If it is not handled properly, her whole life will be ruined. After a long time, Director Johnson sighed and said, "Don't worry, I'll find someone to come over and deal with it together." The person Director Johnson called was actually the Deputy Director of the County Public Security Bureau, Inspector Brown. He looked only 30 or 40 years old, considered a relatively young inspector. The advantage of being young is that he is full of justice, and his subsequent performance also confirmed my first impression of him. Of course, I truthfully reported the situation on my side and showed him the video of Lily's oral account. After watching it, Inspector Brown's face darkened. He paused for a moment, then asked, "Besides this, did William do anything else? Cheats had followed the victims." I asked back in puzzlement, "Isn't that enough?" "No, you misunderstood, Inspector," Brown quickly explained. "If only identified as indecent assault, the maximum sentence is no more than 5 years, and William's subsistence allowance household and disabled may only end up with probation." I was shocked to hear this, and didn't know what to say for a moment. That is to say, William wouldn't even have to go to jail. This really caught me off guard. Director Johnson then carefully asked, "Then, at least his guardianship can be revoked, right?" Inspector Brown also sighed and said, "William, you know him better than I do. He had basically no relatives, let alone his wife's side. I just handled her missing person case not long ago. If the guardianship is revoked, who will raise the poor little girl?" My heart sank again. It seemed that rescuing Lily was not as easy as I thought. Although the matter seemed clear, it was really difficult to solve it properly. Director Johnson frowned again and said, "Then we can only not take any measures for the time being and find Mary first." Inspector Brown immediately rejected Director Johnson's suggestion. "Old Johnson, do you know how long she's been missing? Finding her is not an easy task. But that little girl can't go home." The two of them began to discuss, like old friends, one sentence after another. Director Johnson, calling Inspector Brown, was the best he could do within his power. But even so, it still did not solve the problem at once. Just then, Anna called. I went out of Director Johnson's office and answered the phone.
"How is it? Is Lily okay?"
"Very good. I took her to eat and play, talked to her a lot, learned some things. I have to tell you these things first." I didn't dare to say a word and just listened to her quietly. Anna only found out that this little girl really came to the county town when she took her to the county town for dinner. She took Lily to the mall, bought clothes, ate delicious food, and easily won Lily's favor. This little girl, who had never seen the world, had nothing to hide from Anna. So in the conversation, Anna intentionally or unintentionally asked about her views on her parents. For her father, she kept repeating the same things. But for her mother, she said something creepy. I miss my mom, but Dad told me that Mom won't be coming back. She will bless me from heaven. She did follow the victims. Anna was stunned. Stunned. She put Lily on the mall's carousel and immediately called me. I was also stunned. After hanging up the phone, I pushed the door open abruptly and rushed into Director Johnson's office. Seeing me in such a hurry, they thought something big had happened. And they were right. It was a big deal. Do you think it's possible that Mary, she didn't run away from home, but died? I tried to use the simplest sentences to tell what Anna had just told me on the phone. Director Johnson shook his head. Inspector Brown's face darkened even more. I have to do some more investigation. But before that, Director Johnson, I have some questions to ask. Director Johnson stared at him in confusion. He also slowly asked, Mary, what's her name? This time, it was my turn to frown. This matter was much more complicated than I thought. Well, her name is Mary. What's there to ask? Should follow the victims. Director Johnson obviously didn't want to answer. Inspector Brown further pressured him, saying, it was my people who were investigating her disappearance, and she didn't even have a registered residence. She sold in before. What's her real name? Director Johnson sighed. He was acquiescing. Sure enough, this place was really messed up. Inspector Brown sternly spoke his guess. Stop hiding it, old Johnson. She wasn't mentally ill at all. It was you who forced her to be sick, because she was trafficked and imprisoned and beaten. Now she's not missing because of her illness or running away from home. She's probably a victim. The whole incident was refreshing my cognitive limits again and again. Director Johnson was non-committal and only said this. She came here 20 or 30 years ago. I don't have the specific information. Maybe I have to ask old Evans. He may know. Old Evans, naturally referring to village head Evans. Inspector Brown stressed again. If there really was a homicide, Mary can't be an unregistered person. Otherwise, it would be tantamount to saying that the murderer killed a non-existent person, and the handling of the case would be very complicated, and it may not be possible to convict him for a while, understand? Director Johnson nodded with a sad face. Not only was there no progress in the matter, but it became more complicated. My head was aching too. Inspector Brown directly sent someone to pick up village head Evans. As he put it, now immediately. If we don't get to the bottom of this today, none of us are going to sleep tonight. Director Johnson was naturally also left in a conference room, and I didn't dare to leave for a moment. But I still took the time to call a colleague in the business department of our unit, Lao Chang. I told him about the matter briefly and asked him to think of a solution. Our unit did not have the capacity to directly connect with poverty alleviation, let alone take over Lily's custody. But some of our partners' group companies have foundations that run child support programs. All we could do was report on the local families in need, and then connect with these foundations to carry out poverty alleviation work. Asking Lao Zhang to find a solution alone was not about poverty alleviation, but about completely taking over Lily's custody. Lao Jing, upon hearing this, directly promised me that he would take care of this matter and get it done. I believed that he was capable of getting it done. so I was finally a little relieved. Shortly after returning to the conference room village, Head Evans arrived. Inspector Brown was still very serious, and before Village Head Evans could even sit down, he stared at him as if he were interrogating a criminal and asked, "Old Evans, tell me, where is Mary from?" Haspediska. Village Head Evans was stunned, turned to stare at Director Johnson, and for a moment could not speak. Director Johnson sighed and persuaded, "Just say it, old Evans. This is a big deal. It's all been 20 or 30 years. You can say it." Village Head Evans paused and finally spoke slowly. "That's right, Mary. She was indeed trafficked. 27 years ago, and she was only 15 or 16 or 17. She was sold by human traffickers. William's parents spent some money to buy her as a wife for William. At first, Mary would naturally resist. She wanted to run away. She wanted to leave. But when Village Head Evans said this, he deliberately glossed over it in a flat tone. That's how it always went. Lock them up, beat them up for a few months, and they'll be good. Such a light-hearted statement, but it sent chills down my spine. Inspector Brown pointedly questioned this point. So Mary wasn't mentally ill at all, let alone lost her mind and ran away, right? Village Head Evans nodded. Then he added, "However, it doesn't prevent her from really leaving. After all, William in that state, their family really has nothing to look forward to." Inspector Brown cut him off again. "Isn't there still a daughter? She wouldn't abandon her daughter." To be honest, Inspector Brown's really fierce. I could feel his anger from a few meters away. However, he also did possess the good qualities a police officer should have, because he immediately calmed down and immediately arranged what to do next, just like carrying out a detective mission. As it stands, I can't report it to the Criminal Investigation Department yet. First of all, there is no evidence. Secondly, it will scare the snake, so I can only take someone to investigate. So on the premise of protecting Lily, we have to do something together. Village Head Evans, you can't go back. You have to come with me to the station. Village Head Evans' face turned pale. I guess that Inspector Brown wanted to have a private chat with him. As for what to talk about, either about the trafficking of Mary or the adoption of Lily. These two things, especially the former, could not have been done in a village like that, without the village head turning a blind eye. Director Johnson, please report to the county leader in charge of this area and make sure that my investigation will not be hindered. Please. Director Johnson immediately agreed. Finally, Inspector Brown looked at me. Obviously, this was addressed to my media affiliation. I also immediately assured him, "Don't worry, we will absolutely not expose this matter indiscriminately until it is completely over. In addition, Lily will not return to William. I have already communicated with my colleagues. We will contact partners with foundations that have child support projects and finalize Lily's custody as soon as possible. If possible, we will take Lily away as soon as possible." Inspector Brown nodded. Director Jensen also immediately said, "I will also try my best to cooperate. There will be no problem with the procedures." And Village Head Evans just raised his eyebrows. I didn't understand what his expression meant at the time. Nightfall seemed to have fallen all at once. When I returned to the hotel, Anna had coaxed the exhausted Lily to sleep after a long day of playing. She came to ask me about the progress. I told her about the situation of the day, but so far, there was basically no progress. Then she also told me about her day with Lily. After returning in the afternoon, she stayed in the hotel with Lily to watch cartoons. Along the way, she chatted with her, on and off. When it came to her parents, Lily asked a strange question. "Sister, is the mountain the sky?" At first, Anna wondered why she would ask that, until Lily said the next sentence. "Dad said he was going to take Mom up the mountain, but then he said he was going to heaven. Is the mountain the sky?" So Anna immediately called me. I was stunned for a moment, then turned my head and asked Inspector Brown. Didn't Village Head Evans say that, after William recovered, he often ran to the hillside at the back of the mountain? Inspector Brown slowly shook his head. I only then remembered that Inspector Brown was not present that day, but he had already taken out his cell phone and was calling Village Head Evans. Yes, I definitely heard that. I suddenly guessed where Mary's body was. I didn't listen carefully to what Inspector Brown said to Village Head Evans, but after he hung up the phone, he immediately said to the police officer who was driving, "Right away, go to William's house." Things were finally going to make some real progress. But what happened next really baffled us. When we rushed to William's house, Village Head Evans was already sitting on the threshold of his house. Seeing us rushing over, he didn't even get up, nor did he greet us. He looked up, his face full of desolation. Inspector Brown rushed into the house, and I and other police officers followed closely behind. There was no one in the hall. Inspector Brown had already gone into the room. I rushed to the door and was startled by the sight inside. William was hanging from the beam, and Inspector Brown had gone up to save him. But looking at William's appearance, it was obvious that there was no saving him. What's more, Village Head Evans was sitting at the door. He must have come in and seen the scene, made sure that William was no longer alive, and then returned to the door in a daze waiting for us. At that time, I had only one thought in my mind: guilty conscience suicide. William must have known that his crimes against his wife and daughter had been exposed, so he chose to commit suicide. Because, in the following time, just like Inspector Brown and I speculated, the police dug up Mary in the loose dirt under a tree on the hillside where William often went for walks. The whole incident was finally coming to an end. It was a mess. But there was also good news that day. Previously, I had contacted my colleague, Lo Jiang, in the business department of our unit and asked him to contact our partners to find a foundation with a child rearing project. After a whole night and a day of there was a foundation that was interested in this topic, and now it was just waiting for the details and the approval of the leaders of both sides. The heart that I had been holding on to finally relaxed a little. This way, even if Lily had to be handed over to an orphanage or something in the end, at least her living expenses and the education expenses she needed to grow up should be fine. What happened next was even more chaotic, especially for Inspector Brown. The bodies of William and Mary were particularly difficult to deal with, because he had to avoid as much as possible not to let Lily know that both her parents were dead. In the end, it might be treated as a family dispute, a murder-suicide case. But fortunately, with the help of the county leaders, the docking of our partner foundation with Lily went relatively smoothly. So after a while, we were going to take Lily away with us to our city, the city she called the outside world. I believed she must be looking forward to it. And with Anna's company, she was actually able to get used to life without her father, which I was very surprised by. I also confirmed with Anna that as long as it was not deliberately mentioned, Lily seemed to have completely stopped talking about her father on her own initiative. Perhaps this was also a good thing. I told Lily that everything would be fine in the future. She looked up and nodded, her watery eyes particularly energetic. At that moment, I thought this was the end of the story. But I never expected that there was a story in it that I could not have imagined at all. It was a month later. Inspector Brown called me, and I was deeply surprised. And he started by telling me the results of his investigation during this time. Mary's body had been in the ground for a month, and there was very little left of it when it was dug up. But because of the needs of the case, it was still sent for an autopsy. And the results of the autopsy were very unexpected. The coroner found multiple fractures on Mary's body, but no fatal injuries. The coroner speculated that it was probably death from internal bleeding after being subjected to violence. But because the internal organs had completely rotted, there was no way to determine whether this was the cause. At that moment, my disgust for William rose to a new level, because it meant that Mary was probably beaten to death. But the police did not find any murder weapon in William's house that matched, not even a suspected one. This presented a contradiction, as Inspector Brown put it. If he could dispose of the murder weapon without a trace, then he shouldn't have disposed of the body so sloppily and went for a walk every day. Why? For fear that others wouldn't know. I wondered if it was because of his inconvenient legs. But with his inconvenient legs, there was even less reason to deliberately walk to the hillside halfway up the mountain and return to the spot where Mary's body was hidden. Also, we found a CT scan from the county hospital a year ago in William's belongings. It was a brain tumor, but William didn't have a brain tumor. In addition, village head Evans, he resigned from his position as director of the village committee. I couldn't put these things together for a moment, until Inspector Brown started asking me, "When did your unit decide to help this family? Was it through village head Evans?" It was a month and a half ago. It was communicated through village head Evans. That's right, because later I used some methods to communicate with Thomas, he admitted. They beat up Mary that night. Mary went to their house that night, and it was already late. Almost everyone in the countryside was resting, so Thomas and his wife were very impatient and directly resorted to violence. What? I said it before, this matter was too messy. It was so messy that I couldn't sort it out at once, and even with new clues, I couldn't integrate them into the incident very well. Inspector Brown sighed. Then he suddenly changed the subject and said to me, "Mr. Liu, the main purpose of my call this time is to make a request that is your report on this matter."
Can you not report it?
In fact, we have also repeatedly changed the report, so much so that it has not been sent out for more than a month. It was about Lily, and it was really difficult to write, if we were to be considerate of her mental health. We even had a second plan, which was to focus on Lily's growth and complete a follow-up report with our partner foundation. So when Inspector Brown asked me this question, I thought about it for a while and agreed. "Thank you, Mr. Liu. Of course, you can write it as a novel, because this truth is really a bit cruel." Actually, I didn't figure out the truth at first. After communicating with Inspector Brown, I sat down, cleared my head, and wrote down the timeline of the whole thing. From the day we communicated with village head Evans, it was counted as day 1. On the 15th day, Mary went to Lily's biological parents with the purpose of getting them to take back custody of Lily, but ended up being beaten and driven away. On the 16th day, William reported to village head Evans that Mary was lost, but in fact, she was buried in the back mountain by him. On the 47th day, we arrived. On the 48th day, William ended his life. Among them, William was disabled and lost his ability to work. The contractor ran away, and he was unable to get compensation, and he was heavily in debt. As for the brain tumor that was detected a year ago, no, most of the time, William was at a construction site in another place, and he really didn't have a brain tumor. Then it could only be Mary, because she was an unregistered person and didn't have an ID card. She used her husband's ID card to register. I checked in some small county towns, including the small county town hospital they were in. It was feasible. So, that's how it was. I was stunned for a good few seconds before I immediately took out my phone and called village head Evans. After getting through, I asked this question. Village head, did you go to William that night? After I said that our unit would be responsible for contacting the foundation and fulfilling the follow-up support obligations for Lily, did you go and tell William? Because the next day, William committed suicide. Village head Evans did not answer my question. He was silent for a long time before he said something inexplicable. You are a formal unit, he thought. If there was a death, it would be a stain and you would not help. Since his injury, he has not had a day of peace. He was very afraid that he would drag his daughter down. At that moment, thousands of thoughts raced through my mind, but I couldn't say a word. Perhaps Mary was not murdered by him, but died of a brain disease after being beaten and seriously injured by that family. Perhaps she died that night after returning home. Perhaps she went back home with a body full of injuries, just to see Lily one last time. Even though it was so late, Lily was already sound asleep. So in the end, it was William who disposed of Mary's body. He panicked and buried his wife's body directly on the back mountain. Stupid, that was so stupid. However, that day I couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness for this stupid man. I went to see Lily. She was placed in a well-environment orphanage by the foundation and quickly integrated into life there. When I went to visit, she was playing with blocks alone in the sandbox in the small garden. It was a sunny day. Lily was very happy to see me and greeted me, calling me uncle. I squatted down beside her, playing blocks with her and chatting with her. After a long while, I finally asked, Lily, after all this time, do you miss your dad? She played with the blocks and told me in a milky voice. Dad said it. He said, I wouldn't see him for a long time, but it's okay. He and Mom will bless me from heaven. He also said that he would miss me, and said that when he missed me, I wouldn't have to think about him. Goosebumps already appeared on my arms. After I took Lily away, William never had the chance to see Lily again. Absolutely not. He had already told her that he had long known that he was going to die. I was silent for a long time before I made up my mind and asked, Lee, what you said before about your dad playing elephant toys with you was a lie, right? Uncle saw through it. Lily abruptly raised her head and looked at me with wide eyes. Then she leaned into my ear and said, "Uncle, don't tell anyone. Dan said that I must say that, or he would be angry." I nodded and stood up. I managed to squeeze out a smile and then touched her head. Smiling, I looked up at the sun. Tears couldn't help but well up in my eyes. They must have loved Lily very, very much. Lily must have been more important to them than their lives. So, Lily would definitely be happy. After William lost his leg and his ability to work, the world could no longer accommodate them. What's more, Mary had been hiding her brain disease. They may have been desperate for this world, but in their desperation, they were still constantly seeking a way out for Lily, and even found Lily's biological parents, even to death. No, maybe they also knew that only if they died,